Okay, so let's continue with the navigation of the world oceans. Phoenicians were earlier on in 4000, 5000 BC navigating the oceans already, going north. They made it to the British Isles. So imagine being in continental Europe and not knowing the existence of the British Isles just to the north across the English Channel. That gives you a sense of how world maps and so on began to evolve, and how navigation approaches began to be improved by going further into different weathers, the long distances, and so on and so forth. Greek Peteas, in that sense, used the North Star to determine the latitude of where he was as far back in 325 BC. So using the angle between the horizon and the North Star, he was able to determine the latitudinal position. We will come back and see later on that this is not so easy when you're going east to west. You will need something else to know where you are with reference to where you started. Eratosthenes was a librarian at the Library of Alexandria, and he was curious that during high noon, the flagpole at the library was creating a shadow whose angle was not creating a shadow, but slightly further away, around 600 kilometers, another pole was actually creating a shadow. So he figured this means that probably we are on a sphere. Earth is a sphere. So he used the horizontal distance and the angle of the shadow to determine for the first time the circumference of the Earth of around 40,000 kilometers, which is actually remarkably close to the actual value. We'll see that this information was actually unfortunately lost by the time Ptolemy was trying to make a map of the world around 150 AD. But Herodotus produced an inaccurate world map around 450 BC based on the information he had at the time. He thought there was an infinite ocean, Mare Atlanticum on one side, Mare Erythraeum to the south, and he knew that Europa was home to the Mediterranean, which is middle of land, and Libya was to the south. There was Arabia, and also Asia, and India is also mentioned here because already some knowledge existed about India by then, as we know. So Claudius Ptolemy came along and produced a much more accurate map of the world, but he had erroneously updated Eratosthenes' original estimate of the circumference of the Earth, which actually led later on Christopher Columbus to believe that the distances were much shorter. So when he in fact reached only the Western Hemisphere, Caribbean islands, he thought he had already reached India. This loss of information happened because of the burning down of the Library of Alexandria and loss of all the information, and we'll see that only the Arabs retained some of that information during the Dark Ages after the burning down of the Library of Alexandria, and they became the dominant navigators in the Mediterranean Sea. And they also learned about the change in the winds, the monsoon winds over the Arabian Sea. And in fact, the word monsoon comes from them, mausam, which means season. So they knew that the winds were favorable to go towards India in the boreal summer months. And if they wanted to come back, it was better to wait till the summer monsoon was over, and you could come back when the winds switched in the winter monsoon months of November, December. So they learned to use the monsoon winds to navigate the Indian Ocean for travel. A little bit later on, coming to the Middle Ages, when the climate had changed, we had the so-called medieval warming period, when the ice extent had been reduced over Iceland and Greenland. Parts of Greenland were in fact favorable for carrying on agriculture. So Leif Erikson and his father actually went pretty far west to settle Iceland and parts of Greenland, and as we'll see in a map soon, they made it all the way into North America, parts of Canada, and so on. So the warming at the time, in fact, had allowed vineyards to exist as far north as Newfoundland, what is now Newfoundland. Leif Erikson called it Vanland because of those vineyards. And Greenland and Vanland, Iceland, were settled. But by 1450, the volcanic activity had increased. The medieval warm period was coming to an end. And then it was followed by minimum in solar sunspots, which reduces radiation and also assists in the cooling. So the glaciers began to come further down south. Greenland got re-glaciated and became unsuitable for agriculture. Iceland became much more glaciated as well. And the habitation, of course, continues, but the Vikings were driven out of there. But you can see in this map, by 860 AD, they had made it to Iceland. From there, they went directly into Vanland and Newfoundland, and into Greenland, around into Labrador Sea, all the way up into Baffin Island, and so on. So the explorations went pretty far west and pretty far north. Of course, we don't talk about these explorations as much as we talk about the Christopher Columbus and what followed after in what we call the Age of Discovery. So we'll learn about that soon.